Hello, BookTube, and welcome back to March Mystery Madness. This is a month-long BookTube event being hosted by myself and a whole bunch of other people, great BookTubers, in which we celebrate murder mysteries the whole month long. All of their permutations, all of their different subgenres, all of the different voices and authors, forgotten and remembered. So much fun. There are reading sprints. There are prompts. There are all sorts of manifestations on other social media. There are live streams. We just had a live stream hosted by Sarah, the bookish knitter, that saying that it went off the rails a couple of times would probably be an insult to rail yards everywhere. But it was still a whole lot of fun. There was some mystery conversation mixed in with talk of Matt Wall's leather apron. Sorry, loincloth. But one event for March Mystery Madness that's very tiny is a little series of read-alongs that I'm doing with David Murphy. Now, a lot of you are new to this channel. There are thousands of you who are new to this channel who would have found this channel and maybe all of this little corner of BookTube after David Murphy stopped making videos. He made videos for a while, at least a year, and they were engaging, although their tedium quotient went up and up almost into Steve levels. He is an economist. He's a trained student of not only economics but the history of economics, and wasn't afraid to let you know it. then he left BookTube for a while, and we all got a chance to breathe and maybe talk about trivial matters for a while. But he's coming back to BookTube, and I'm hoping that he comes and stays. And we are doing an event together for the month of March where he and I read 4 canonical murder mysteries. He did me the pleasure of letting me pick them. We are an odd team, David and I, because he is much smarter than I am, but I am a little older than he is. I believe I'm 4 years older than he is. I didn't hear that. Okay. And so I have a little more experience when it comes to all things reading. And so he let me pick the murder mysteries. He's not very familiar with the genre, and I picked 4 winners. If I do say so myself, I picked 4 mysteries from the canon that I don't think have a dissenting voice anywhere. This first week, we are doing a read-along of The Hound of the Baskervilles by Arthur Conan Doyle. Next week, we're doing The Body in the Library by Agatha Christie, who, my estimation of her novels has only gone up over the last 10 years. Every time I revisit one of them or 5 of them in a row, my estimation of how good they are goes up. That estimation took a dint about 10 years ago when I read Lord Edgware Dies for the first time in 20 years and saw all of its flaws and lazy writing, and just made the mistake of writing everything off. Said, yeah, she was just Agatha Christie, But no, I think there's a lot of craft involved. Lord Edgware Dies, I think, is still a weak novel, but The Body in the Library is not. The Body in the Library, I would rank right up there with, for instance, A Murder is Announced as a genuinely great Agatha Christie mystery. So we're doing that. Then we're doing The Daughter of Time by Josephine Tey, which, due respect to The Hound of the Baskervilles, may be the best-selling book of the 4. there is no way to overestimate the popular appeal of The Daughter of Time, the widespread effect of it. Trust me when I tell you that the Tudor studies departments of major universities sailed on peacefully oblivious to the existence of the Agatha Christie novel, The Body in the Library, and they were all shaken to their cores by The Daughter of Time and responded to it. And then we're finishing up with Gaudy Night by Dorothy Sayers, which, again, I don't think I would face much in the way of dissent from Sayers fans if I called that her greatest book. So we're doing that. We're going to do 4 read-alongs. Our next one for next weekend is Body in the Library by Agatha Christie. Feel free to pull your Agatha Christie off the shelf. I was very dismayed to see that I don't have any Agatha Christie on the shelf at all. None whatsoever. I don't have big fat collected volumes. I don't have a string of paperbacks. Fortunately, several of you have been very generous with ebooks, so I have all of Agatha Christie to read. I just don't have any paperbacks on the shelf, which feels weird. And I know exactly the paperback design that I want for them, which is going to make things much harder because I'm never going to find that. But one way or another, we're doing The Body in the Library next week. But this week, today, we're doing The Hound of the Baskervilles in an event that I wanted to call March Mystery Madness Tutti Frutti, with Tutti spelled Two. David nixed it. Don't know why. Anyway, today we're reading The Hound of the Baskervilles by Arthur Conan Doyle. Probably doesn't need much in the way of an introduction, but nevertheless, just in case it does. The Hound of the Baskervilles sprang from a mistake, the greatest mistake in the history of literature. Because in a story called The Final Problem, Arthur Conan Doyle, who had grown a little tired of constantly having Sherlock Holmes brought up at every dinner party, at every soiree, at every literary event, he thought of himself as a serious author who sometimes wrote Sherlock Holmes potboiler murder mysteries. That wasn't true. Who cares what he thought? That wasn't true. You don't get to make those calls as a writer. Once you've made an immortal character. But anyway, he decided in the story of The Final Problem to kill off Sherlock Holmes, and to do it in a grand style. I'll admit that. Sherlock Holmes confronts his arch enemy, his opposite number, the Napoleon of crime, Professor Moriarty, and they grapple on a steep ridge overlooking the Reichenbach Falls. And as Dr. Watson is away, he can't help his friend. And when he returns to the spot, there's a note from Holmes and no one around, because they have plunged down into the moiling raw of the falls and are presumed both dead. And that didn't go over well with the London reading public. Conan Doyle, anecdotally, at least apocryphally, he was pelted with vegetables in the street and never heard the end of it. If he thought that he'd heard a lot about Sherlock Holmes before he killed off Sherlock Holmes, he had no idea how much he was going to hear about him after. It was a crime against literature, as he knew perfectly well. And he tried to face it out for a while, but it wasn't going to work. It wasn't going to work. No publisher wanted to let him do it. No member of the public wanted to let him do it. Even if rumor is true, a certain member of the royal family didn't want to let him get away with it. So eventually he decided, well, I killed the character. There's only so much you can do. But I can tell an earlier adventure. I can uncover an earlier adventure of Sherlock Holmes. I had plenty that are alluded to and never chronicled, and it stands to read. The Giant Rat of Sumatra, famously, is a story that is alluded to but never chronicled. It stands to reason, his reasoning went, that if some of them were alluded to and never chronicled, then what about some that weren't alluded to, that still happened? So that's what he did. In 1901, he started serializing a new Sherlock Holmes story called The Hound of the Baskervilles, it takes place before Holmes' death. It was still going to be years until Arthur Conan Doyle brought Holmes back by saying the simple reason why he didn't perish in that great pit of the Reichenbach Falls is because he was never in it. But we were a while to get to. First, we have The Hound of the Baskervilles. Of course, the reading world went nuts. Absolutely nuts. Probably in a way that was not equaled or exceeded until the Harry Potter frenzy of just 20 years ago. But nothing between then and there that was of the same just earth-shaking magnitude. And it's a corker of a story. So there are all sorts of monographs about how Arthur Conan Doyle came up with the story, but it's a corker of a story. It starts, as so many stories do, with a visitor to 221B Baker Street, the home of Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson, the digs that they share. They get a visit from a man named Dr. Mortimer, comes with a spaniel, who tells them the story of a man in his rural neighborhood out in the countryside, where evil may flourish. As we learn, right? There's a Sherlock Holmes story, a famous moment where Holmes and Watson are on the train going out into the countryside, and they're looking at all the peaceful green landscapes with houses dotted here and there. And Holmes knocks Watson out of his reverie by saying that the worst evil in the world happens in places like that, not in London. This Dr. Mortimer has a story to relate about a member of the landed gentry named Baskerville at Baskerville Hall, who had a weak heart and who has been found dead in the yew alley of Baskerville Hall. And he's been found with a horrible rictus on his face, clawing at the ground, and it looks like just a heart attack. I don't know how many of you have seen uh, photographs of people who died of heart attacks, most of them don't look like they died peacefully in their sleep. They look like they were fighting with a bear when it happened, because it's unbelievably painful, and then you die. So, and your face is caught in that rictus. But the problem is that there are two problems that Dr. Mortimer wants to pose to Sherlock Holmes after he's engaged in a little phrenology, a little sign of the times. Dr. Mortimer is a phrenologist, which is the totally discredited study of bumps and head shape. And he tells Sherlock Holmes that he hadn't seen him until then, and he really wasn't expecting such a dolichocephalic skull. He confesses, "I covet your skull." But once he starts controlling himself, he tells the story, and there are two elements to that story. One is an old manuscript, centuries old manuscript, that he's brought along to read to Holmes and Watson. It is the story of the Lord of Baskerville Hall, all those centuries ago, who was inflamed with lust for a virtuous young woman, brought her to Baskerville Hall, and basically imprisoned her in one of the rooms, and she escaped and dashed out onto the moors. These great, if you don't know what a moor is, there's no way that Doyle does a great job describing moors in this novel. It is a very scenically powerful novel. But nevertheless, if you haven't been there, if you haven't seen them, especially in late autumn when it's wet and there are fogs everywhere that move like they have a mind of their own, and if you don't know what a moor is, the closest you could probably come would be a really old and elaborate salt marsh here in America. But moors have a lot more character to them than that, because they have very deep, rocky outcrops on islands. So deep that you can have a mine on one of those rocky outcrops. There's a tin mine in Hound of the Baskervilles. But the girl escapes out onto the moor. She's running for her life, and she doesn't know where she's going. And when Sir Baskerville finds out, he and his roistering friends, his drunken lord friends who are with him in the hall, getting their nerve up for, we suspect, something horrible done to her. When they find out that she has escaped, he makes the absolutely mad decision, evil decision, to set the hounds on her, to loose his kennel and go chasing her as if she were a game animal across the moors. He doesn't come to his senses and think, what a monstrous thing I've done. Instead, he doubles down. And he's far ahead of all of his drunken retainers when they finally come across him. And he's down on the ground. And the girl is down on the ground, and she's dead. And looming over him is a gigantic hound, a spectral beast. And while they're watching, it rips his throat out and vanishes onto the moor. And the document that Dr. Mortimer reads says that one of the men died on the spot that night from what he'd seen, and the others were broken men after that. And that ever afterwards, a curse haunted the Baskervilles. Not necessarily the hound, but a curse. A lot of them died young and violently. And I want to read you, the document ends in this way. The document has been written by a contemporary witness, and it finishes this way. Let me give you a good, I'll give you a good taste of what the document is like. This is what Dr. Mortimer was reading to Holmes and Watson. "Such is the tale, my sons, of the coming of the hound, which is said to have plagued the family so sorely ever since. If I've set it down, it is because that which is clearly known hath less terror than that which is but hinted at and guessed. Nor can it be denied that many of the family have been unhappy in their deaths, which have been sudden, bloody, and mysterious. Yet we may shelter ourselves in the infinite goodness of Providence, which would not forever punish the innocent beyond that third or fourth generation which is threatened in Holy Writ. To that Providence, my sons, I hereby commend you, and I counsel you by way of caution to forbear from crossing the moor in those dark hours when the powers of evil are exalted." And Holmes thinks this may be of interest to a document collector, but what interest is it to him? As he puts it in the canon, his business is with the here and now. No ghost need apply. But Dr. Mortimer has one other detail to share with him, which is that on the ground, right next to the contemporaneous dead Lord Baskerville, are the paw prints of a gigantic hound. Meaning that the local talk is that the Hound of the Baskervilles has literally returned, and that it came from across the moor to the yew alley and scared Sir Baskerville to death. And that is a little more intriguing, because by that point in the interview with Dr. Mortimer, Holmes has come to the fairly rare position in the corpus of stories. It's fairly rare that Holmes will esteem someone's deductive abilities as worth anything. Most people he thinks are dumb and blind. But by this point in the discussion, he has come to esteem Dr. Mortimer a little as an able observer, someone who wouldn't just panic and fly to London to the famous Mr. Holmes. So he's intrigued. And there's a reason, there's a pragmatic, real-world catch why Dr. Mortimer is in London in the first place, which is that the death of Sir Baskerville means that the estate devolves now to an American cousin, Sir Henry Baskerville, who is now Lord of Baskerville Hall, and has to wind up his affairs in America and come to London to look at the place. And he does. They meet him in London at a hotel where one of our first impressions of him is that he's outraged with the servants, not because he shares the Baskerville temper, the famous Baskerville temper, the famous a-holery that runs in the family. He doesn't. He seems a thoroughly nice guy. The way you always know that in Holmes stories is if Watson likes him. Can't use Holmes as a yardstick for whether a character in a Holmes story is someone you'd want to share a meal with. But you can use Watson as a yardstick. And he likes Sir Henry right away. But we see Sir Henry yelling at the staff of the hotel right when we first meet him for a very pragmatic reason. One of his boots is missing. And what kind of service is it, this place, that you put your boots out to be cleaned and polished, and that when you look at them again, one of them's gone? People reading the story and putting a connection between a hound out on the moors might already be thinking along the lines of why some nefarious person would want a boot of Sir Henry Baskerville to set the scent, to make sure that the weapon fires correctly. And, of course, there is a mysterious chase in London, a mysterious person who's watching. But one way or another, the action decamps to the countryside. It decamps to Baskerville Hall, which has all the accoutrements that you would want. Mysterious light signals in the night, nervous hired help, and eccentric neighbors. There's a beautiful young woman who immediately attracts the eye of both Dr. Watson and Sir Henry. And there's a weird guy. He has an ostentatious bushy beard, and he's a lepidopterist, which is, whether it's Nabokov or anybody else, instantly suspicious. And you have all these people, but you also have an escaped murderer out on the moor who may be the cause of a whole bunch of mayhem. We don't know. And on top of all that, complicating everything right at the start, is that Holmes tells Watson, go on your own. I've got cases to occupy me here in London. I can't join you. A Sherlock Holmes story in which there are nefarious doings out in the countryside and Holmes isn't going. Seems unbelievable. And, of course, it ends up being unbelievable because you know that Holmes is going in order to observe things on his own when he gets a chance, and that he has legwork to do in London first. But that inevitably leads down the line in the story to periods in which it seems like there's more than one mysterious person prowling on the moor. That it could be the murderer, Selden, but could it also be Sherlock Holmes? And maybe somebody else, the master of the Hound? One way or another, things pick up quite a bit. The action picks up quite a bit, and there is a revelation scene. I don't want to spoil this. In case you haven't read The Hound of the Baskervilles, I don't want to spoil the key things. There are a couple of key moments in here. And there is a revelation scene that is masterfully done, because it doesn't require finding a secret doorway or whipping something off a tea tray or something like that. It involves something that has been in plain sight the whole time. Baskerville Hall is old. There are paintings of Baskerville ancestors all over the walls. It takes Holmes to see what's right there in front of everybody else. He gets up on a chair at one point in the story and simply covers part of the face of the person in this old portrait, so that what Watson is seeing is simply the facial features. And they immediately remind him of someone. They are, in fact, identical to someone else in the story, and Watson would never have seen it because the accoutrements got in the way. And we have a great moment here. There's a great moment where let's see here. I want to get the speaking voices right. There's Watson. There's Holmes. There's Watson. Yes, there's Holmes. Holmes says, yes, it is an interesting instance of a throwback which appears to be both physical and spiritual. A study of family portraits is enough to convert a man to this doctrine of reincarnation. The fellow is a Baskerville. That is evident. I agree with that sentiment. I've actually spent a huge amount of time in old English country houses, and it's amazing. When you see a line of portraits, of family portraits, it is amazing. You can see that this is true. Doyle must have seen this with his own eyes. You will be bored, of course, and you will be looking at those portraits going up a staircase, for instance, or lining a long gallery, and you will see a portrait from 300 years ago, and then so-and-so, 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 and then a portrait from centuries later that is identical to centuries ago. Not reincarnation, but definitely phenotypes coming to the surface. But Watson then says, with designs upon the succession. And Holmes says, exactly. This chance of the picture has supplied us with one of the most obvious missing links. We have him, Watson. We have him, and I dare say that before tomorrow night he will be fluttering in our net as helpless as a butterfly. A pin, a cork, and a card, and we add him to the Baker Street collection. And then Watson adds, he burst into one of his rare fits of laughter as he turned away from the picture. I have not heard him laugh often, but it has always boded ill for somebody. Which is true, and we see that in my favorite Sherlock Holmes story, The Adventure of the Red-Headed League, where, vexed with conundrums, Holmes insists that they go to a violin concerto. They go to a concert and they listen to a violin concerto. And Watson observes him while the music is working on him and sees him enraptured in the music, and it thinks how far away this is from Holmes the Sleuth Hound. And yet, this is the food that the sleuth hound lives on, and he muses at that moment, what an evil hour is coming to those who he has set himself to hunt down. And that's the same sentiment here, that you generally don't want to be the reason why Sherlock Holmes is laughing, because it means he knows everything, and he does. And there is a rousing climax that involves not only the Hound, of course, the Hound is going to make a reappearance, and not only last-minute revelations at the peak of violence, and also Inspector Lestrade from London comes in by train, and Holmes gives him the amazing offhand compliment of calling him the most competent of the professionals. We hadn't heard Holmes estimate Lestrade that way before, and it's neat. It's neat to see. But the climax also involves an encroaching fog bank that will ruin everything. It will literally cost a man his life, and it's out of Holmes's hands. It's out of anybody's hands. Whether or not it includes the action is totally up to chance. And Arthur Conan Doyle writes it like the Dickens. In fact, not like Dickens, not like Charles Dickens. He writes it extremely effectively, so that you're on the edge of your seat, wondering about all of that, wondering how the timing is going to work, and whether or not somebody's going to die at the end. And then there's a long finishing period where Holmes and Watson just discuss all the details and lay it all out. And it's, I confidently say, terrific. It's absolutely terrific. We started off this little mini read-along with a bang. I lost count of how many times I've read The Hound of the Baskervilles. I have no idea how many times I've read it. And yet it still works on me. It still does. After all this time, the thing I noticed a little more this time around were the beautiful descriptions of the countryside, with the blanket of fog, with islands of rock looking like ships at sea floating on it, and all of it illuminated by the moon. That was just lovely. But anyway, that is our first read-along for this March Mystery Madness. David will also be making a video today about Hound of the Baskervilles. I'll be dying to know what his impressions were. I think he's never read it before. And next week we'll be moving on from the progenitor of all murder mystery stories to the reigning queen. That is Agatha Christie. So if you want to join us, feel free to read The Body in the Library. It's a quick read. You won't have any trouble with it at all, with getting it done between now and then. And also in the comments field, feel free to sound off on whether or not you like the idea of David and I doing a live stream to wrap up the month. I think that might be a lot of fun. We've never tried it before. If that interests you, feel free to vote yes or no. But anyway, I'm going to wrap this up, but I'll be back. Thank you, BookTube.